Hello friends, welcome to tutorial in English literature. Today I shall discuss various aspects of theatre of the absurd. It was a short-lived yet significant theatrical movement centered in Paris in 1950s. It was not a conscious movement. That means the playwright of the movement developed independently of each other. This movement will be remembered in history for many things, the most significant of these being Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. When it was first staged in Paris in 1953, the literary world was shocked by the appearance of a drama so different from conventional theatre. Theatre of the absurd really had a profound impact on the modern theatrical landscape, and many of the plays associated with the movement are still highly regarded and frequently performed today. So there are a lot to know, lot to discuss. But before I proceed, I want to ask a question. Nonsense literature is regarded as one of the precursors of absurd drama. Victorian poem Jabberwocky is considered as one of the greatest nonsense poems written in English. Now the question is, who wrote the poem Jabberwocky? I shall tell you the answer at the end of the discussion. The term theatre of the absurd is coined by Hungarian-born critic Martin Eslin, who made it the title of his book on this subject. The theatre of the absurd finds its roots in the philosophy of existentialism. Existentialism posits that life was inherently meaningless and humans were fundamentally incapable of controlling their fates in a harsh and uncaring universe. The origins of existentialism were laid in the 19th century by philosophers such as Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, but it first appeared in the cultural mainstream primarily through the work of Jean-Paul Sartre in the first half of 20th century. But the theatre of absurd was most influenced by the philosophy of existentialism articulated by French philosopher Albert Camus in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus. In this essay, Camus defines the human condition as basically meaningless, and humans were fundamentally incapable of controlling their fates in a harsh and uncaring universe. For Camus, the legendary figure of Sisyphus was the prototype of an absurd hero. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods for eternity to roll a massive stone up a hill, only to see it roll back to the bottom immediately. He represented the epitome of futile labor and pointless existence. This quality can be seen in many characters of absurdist plays. Now, who are the main playwrights of this movement? According to Martin Eslin, the five defining playwrights of the movement are Irish writer Samuel Beckett, French writers Jean Genet and Eugene Ionesco, French-Russian writer Arthur Adamov, and British writer Harold Pinter. Other playwrights whose selected works have been labeled absurdist are Tom Stoppard, Arthur Kopit, Manuel de Pedrolo, Fernando Arrabal, Edward Albee, Boris Vian, Václav Havel, and Jean Tardieu. At this point, we should know how and why this type of theatre evolved in the second half of 20th century Europe. Although the theatre of absurd is often traced back to avant-garde experiments of 1920s and 1930s, its roots actually date back much further. Absurd elements first made their appearance in the wild humor and buffoonery of old Greek comedy and the plays of Aristophanes in particular. During the 19th century, the acknowledged predecessor of what would come to be called the theatre of the absurd is Alfred Jarry's monstrous puppet play, Ubi Roy. Ubi Roy is a caricature, a terrifying image of the animal nature of man and his cruelty. In the 1920s and 1930s, the surrealists expanded on Jarry's experiments. Their intention was to abolish art as a mere imitation of surface reality and to deal with the essences rather than the appearances. Silent film comedy as well as the tradition of verbal nonsense in the early sound films of Laurel and Hardy, W.H. Fields and Marx Brothers also contributed to the development of the theatre of absurd. Apart from the verbal nonsense of Francois Rebellious, Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear also has impact on it. But it was the Second World War that finally brought the theatre of absurd to life. The global nature of this conflict and the resulting trauma of living under the threat of nuclear annihilation reveal the essential precariousness of human life. Man lost his faith in progress, in morality, in religion, in social system, and in the validity of its institution. The absurdist playwrights attempted to convey this sense of bewilderment, anxiety, and wonder in the face of an inexplicable universe. Now let's learn about its salient features that have made it so unique. Absurd dramatists believe that the only way to represent the absurdity of modern condition is to write in an absurd manner. So the literature of the absurd is as bizarre in style as it is in subject matter. Conventions governing everything from plot to dialogue are routinely flouted. The resulting scenes, actions, and dialogues are usually disconnected, repetitive, and intentionally nonsensical. Now let's see how the theatre of absurd actively rejects the conventional notions of plot. First, there is often a deliberate absence of the cause and effect relationship between the scenes. Another feature is non-linear development of plots. Plots are sometimes cyclical, ending where they began. The incidents are repetitive and appear illogical. Action sometimes defies logic or easy understanding. Occasionally, it appears as though there is no plot at all to speak of. There is also a deliberate lack of conflict, which is the soul of a play. Characterization of absurd drama is also quite unusual. Characters are sometimes stereotypical. Often there is an absence of character development. These characters lack the motivation that we find in characters of realistic dramas. Time, place, and identity are frequently blurred, and characters are often unsure about who or where they are. The dialogue of this kind of plays is also quite different. Dialogues are often illogical, repetitive, and sometimes telegraphic and clipped. That means very short. We can notice long pauses and frequent use of silence. Dialogue is also full of wordplay. Stagecraft of these plays is also in stark contrast to conventional theatre. Often simple and minimalist, stagecraft is used. Barren set pieces barely denoting a location is a common feature of absurdist theatre. These features can be seen in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. It has no story or plot to speak of. It represents two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, in a waste place, hopelessly waiting for an unidentified person, Godot, who may or may not exist. They sometimes think they remember that they may have an appointment with Godot. At the end of the first act, a boy informs them that Mr. Godot cannot come today, but he will surely come tomorrow. Second act repeats significantly the same pattern. The same boy arrives and delivers the same message. Each time, the two tramps come across with another pair of characters, Pojo and Lucky. In the first act, Pojo is going to a fair to sell his slave Lucky. In the second act, Pojo is blind and Lucky is dumb. In each act, Vladimir and Estragon attempt to suicide and fail for various reasons. But these variations merely serve to emphasize the sameness of the situation. Nothing happens. Nobody comes, nobody goes. It's awful. The dialogue is also repetitive and it appears as innocent babblings. The two principal figures are not tragic heroes but helpless people in an absurd world. Now let's go back to the question. The correct answer is option D, Lewis Carroll, whose real name was Charles Ludwig Dodgson.